Okay, hello everyone. My name is Michael Dundek. Thank you all for joining this webinar today on IBM Worklight. I am an IT architect working in the south of France in the IBM Center in Lagode, and my main focus is now everything around mobility and more precisely about IBM Worklight. So today I have the pleasure of presenting to you IBM Worklight and talk about the features that already existed in the version 5.0, and I will also highlight it at the end of this presentation, the new features that come with the version 5.0.5. So, on this chart, if we look at a little bit of the reasons why mobility became such a big thing for companies in the last 2 years, we can see in the top left there's a chart that actually shows the amount of computer-based devices that have been sold around the world since 2010. And we can see that in 2011 there has been a clear change of trend when the amount of smartphones and tablet PCs actually surpassed the amount of PCs sold on this planet. So this clearly shows that mobile devices and everything around mobility is something we have to take into account more than ever now, and companies have to start doing the move of actually enabling all their solutions also for the mobile world. Of course, the mobile world comes with all its challenges on its own. We struggled for quite a long time to try to get the normal IT systems up and running properly, developing all kinds of frameworks, coming up with Java, for example, in order to try to standardize the way we develop solutions. Web application made it easy in order to develop only once and run on every platform, for example. Now that the mobile world is here, we kind of face some of those challenges again. For example, we have all those different smartphones running on different operating systems. Apple has a very restricted operating system. Android is another one that is not so restricted. We have BlackBerry. We have now the Windows Phone operating systems. And of course, this comes with a lot of new challenges that we now have to tackle again when it comes to developing mobile applications. So it is clearly shown here that 61% of CIOs are now prioritizing the mobile development, and therefore it is very important to be in this game now of mobile application development, especially focused on enterprise-level applications. So when we talk about enterprise applications or mobile applications in general, we will identify, or we can actually identify, two particular types of applications. So one is what we call the business-to-enterprise application, and the other one is the business-to-consumer type application. So in the business-to-consumer type application on the right, we talk about the regular mobile application that we can download from the normal Apple Store or the Android market, for example. All those games like Angry Birds or Cut the Rope, or more maybe work-focused kind of applications, are all kind of business-to-consumer type applications. The specifics here is that as an application developer, you develop your application for the broad community, and you don't know how many people will be using your application, and you don't know who will be using your application. So that is really one of those specifics of the business-to-consumer kind of model. If we look at the business-to-enterprise model, things are a little different. In a company, when I want to develop my application or enable an application that I already have and extend it to also run on the mobile device, I know who will be using that application. It is for my employees, it is for my customers, and I will know how many people will be using those applications. And also, I will have other kinds of problems to solve in the business-to-enterprise kind of model, because most of the time I will have sensitive data running on my applications. So one example would be, for example, a Salesforce team. So I have an insurance company, for example, that has salespeople that go around and sell insurances to your customers. If they walk around with a tablet or some kind of tablet, an iPad, for example, that is running your business application on it and has a record of all the data of your products, this kind of information would be considered sensitive data that you do not want to lose, that you don't want to get in the wrong hands, etc., etc. So this is one of those challenges that you will face in the business-to-enterprise kind of model. So IBM Worklight really tries to focus on that particular model, the business-to-enterprise model, and try to solve those challenges that come with the business-to-enterprise kind of model. So let me move to the next slide. So on this chart, we see in more details those three main concerns when it comes to adopting the mobile application in your organization. So the number one concern is the security and the privacy. So that is what I just mentioned on the slide before. Let's take the example of the salesperson again. If your sales representative decides to go to the competition because the competition just offers better deals for you as a salesperson, then that person might leave with you all your product data and your sensitive data on his tablet. So this is one big security issue that you have that you want to avoid, and that could give you the reason for not going or not giving mobile applications to your sales team with those sensitive data on it. Another example, if you only get the tablet stolen, for example, someone breaks into your car because you forgot your tablet in the car, this data is now gone. So those are the typical kind of security issues that CIOs are dealing with and have a hard time actually accepting when it goes to going the mobile route. Number two is, of course, the cost of developing. As I mentioned in the beginning, we now have multiple platforms out there running on different operating systems, running or using different development languages. For example, if you develop for the iPhone or the iPad, you will be using a specific language for that particular platform, which is Objective-C. If you develop for the Android, it will be a Java-based framework coding style, the same for the BlackBerry, and Windows will have its own .NET kind of development language. So those are just the four main platforms I'm talking about here. And if you want to develop applications, your one application for each one of those platforms, you will need different types of developers that are specialized on each of those development environments. And this can, of course, drive up the cost of developing considerably, especially if you are looking at maintaining those applications afterwards, updating those applications. You will have to do that on each particular platform individually by different people who are familiar with that particular platform. So this is really another one of the big challenges of developing for the mobile platform and the cost that goes with it. The third point is the integration with cloud services and your backend systems. So if you have existing web services, for example, if you have a database running in the backend, and you need to develop applications that connect to this backend system, interact with your database, interact with your web services, or even interact with the MQ, message queue systems, for example, in order to post or read messages out of a queue. This is a kind of backend integration that can become a little bit complex for mobile applications, especially if you have multiple different operating system and platforms it has to run on. So those are the three main challenges: integrating to your backend, the cost of development, and the security. And Worklight is really trying to aim at solving those three issues in order to make it now possible or make it viable to go the mobile route in enterprise applications. Okay, so here on the next slide, we will have a quick view of the different types of applications we are looking at here. So if we look at the basic browser-based application on the left, we talk about a simple HTML page or even a more complex web-based page that is running in your mobile browser. So the application itself will be sitting on an application server somewhere behind your firewall, and with your mobile browser, you will just connect to that URL and download the application code, well, the HTML, so to speak, to your mobile browser and display the application on your device. So this is a 100% purely connected application, a web-based connected application, where you need an internet connection in order to access this mobile application. On the other extreme, we have the native application. So like any other native application, this is compiled code for that particular platform running on your particular phone that is completely or usually disconnected. It can be connected, of course, but it usually runs completely disconnected. And all the code has been compiled for that platform, so therefore you have a purely native, specific for that environment application. So those are really the two extremes. And between those two, we now have a hybrid application. And the hybrid application is trying to take advantage of both worlds. So in the hybrid application, we will use the advantages of a browser-based HTML application, meaning that we have an application that is developed using standard technologies such as HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. And we will package this application in a way and develop this application in a way that it does look like and behave like a native application as much as possible. And if we cannot do an HTML, JavaScript, and CSS what we need to do, if the application or the interface of the application is just too complex for that, we can still make usage of some native features in order to implement the specifics of my application that cannot be done using HTML and JavaScript. And on top of that, we want to package this HTML, JavaScript, and CSS code into an offline mode package. So we want to package it in a way that I can install this HTML, JavaScript and run it locally on the phone and not have to fetch it from a server in the back end and therefore be connected at all times. So this is really the goal of the hybrid app, is to use the openness of the web world, but take advantage of everything that comes to the native application running in a disconnected mode locally, and also be able to mix and match the two types of technologies if I need to do that. So let me go to the next slide. So in Worklight, that's exactly what we're focusing on, is developing those hybrid applications. So Worklight makes use, of course, of HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript to develop the core functionality of your business application itself. It will do so by using a framework that exists that is called Cordova, Apache Cordova, which is a Apache Foundation open source project. And that main goal is to actually provide you with a container, a native container, that is capable of running locally stored web content inside of that container and make this container displayed on your phone as a native application. So you will not see the URL bar on the top, you will not see the navigation buttons anymore. All you see is a fully 100% white and height browser window running your web application in the back end. And now it's up to you to make this application, of course, look like a native application, to actually have something in your hand that looks and feels like a real native application, but uses HTML and JavaScript and CSS in order to develop the business logic of your application itself. So in order to make this application itself look and feel the way you want, you can use multiple types of frameworks. So there's three main frameworks out there that are used when it comes to developing mobile-oriented web applications, and those are jQuery Mobile, based on the very famous jQuery framework, Dojo Mobile, which is based on Dojo, and Sencha Mobile. So those are the three JavaScript libraries, HTML JavaScript libraries, that you will find out there that are really focusing on developing user interfaces and business application based on JavaScript. Let me move on to the next slide. So that is for the client part of the application itself. So really talking about what is running on your device itself. But very often this device application will have to interact with the backend system. We'll have to interact with databases, we'll have to interact with web services, or maybe an SAP system, or your MQ system, etc. So you have all kinds of backend systems with services that your application on the mobile device will have to interact with. Of course, if we would be limited purely to JavaScript and HTML, that might become a little difficult. So therefore, what Worklight does is add a Worklight server between your backend and your mobile application. So when you have a version of Worklight running, you will also have a Worklight server running behind your firewall. And the Worklight server is going to be the component that takes care of connecting to your backend for you. In order to do that, of course, IBM Worklight has developed and put at your disposal a lot of different APIs and what we call adapters in order to do this backend integration in a very easy and seamless way. Now, from your mobile application standpoint, all you will have to do is communicate with your Worklight server, and also in a very standard and JavaScript lightweight kind of way. So you will communicate with the Worklight server that is sitting behind your firewall, and the Worklight server will take care of connecting you with the backend system for you. Moving on. Next slide. Okay, so in Worklight, in the architecture of Worklight, we identify altogether 5 different components. We see here 4 of them right now. I will move over to the 5th one a little later on. So the 4 components that we see here in Worklight is on the top left, of course, the Worklight Studio. So the Worklight Studio is an Eclipse-based environment that will be used in order to develop your application, the business logic of your application itself, and also package this application in its Cordova native container. Could it be for the iOS, for the Android, for the BlackBerry, or the Windows Phone, for example. So that's the Worklight Studio. It's the tool you're going to use to develop your client-side phone application and also your server-side adapter logic. Then you have underneath that the Worklight server, of course. So your application doesn't have to, but would like to run and communicate with the Worklight server. The Worklight server will, of course, provide different types of functionality on top of the client-side application itself. Some of those examples would be, for example, push notifications. You want to use the push notification system that is available on mobile phones. The Worklight server will provide you with a unified push mechanism that you can use in order to push messages to the different devices that are running your applications. So there's one example. The other one would be implementing a robust security framework. So if you want to use authentication, for example, so someone needs to authenticate to your application before you can actually start using it, Worklight comes with a very advanced framework in order to implement a very robust authentication mechanism between your client application and the Worklight server itself. So those are 2 examples of the kind of services you will find in the Worklight server. This is really where the value sits, is in the Worklight server itself. From the device standpoint, we have, of course, all the APIs and device runtime APIs that are required for your application to run. So we, of course, have all the JavaScript libraries that come with Dojo Mobile, with jQuery Mobile, or Sentra, depends what framework you use. On top of that, you will also have and find the Cordova APIs, which are partially native and partially JavaScript-based. Since Cordova's goal is really to bridge the web world, the JavaScript world, with the native world, it comes with APIs compiled for each device. On top of that, with the JavaScript APIs that will let you interact with those native features that Cordova exposes for you using JavaScript. So all those APIs are bundled, of course, on the device runtime for you. And also on top of that, Worklight will provide its own APIs in order to communicate with the Worklight server and implement the security, the push mechanisms, the direct update, etc., etc. So everything that the Worklight server offers also requires a set of APIs that the device runtime will package in your application and that you can then use in your application to do all the communication between the Worklight server and your device itself. The 4th component in the bottom right is the Worklight console, and the Worklight console can be seen as an administrative console, like you would find in any kind of web server, for example. You usually have a web application server, in the case of IBM Web Application Server, and you will have the web application server admin console that connects to the server. And in the admin console, you can look at your applications, you can configure security on your applications, you can just interact and administer your application itself on top of course, the server itself. Well, the Worklight console has a little bit the same kind of idea. It's not as complex and advanced that you could find in an admin console for an application server, but it will let you administer all your Worklight-specific applications. It will let you manage different versions of your application. You can lock down specific versions of your application. You can put in place or configure certain aspects of your push mechanisms, push notification mechanisms on your applications, etc., etc. So the Worklight console really serves as a window or an administration window on your applications that are running on your Worklight server. Going to the next slide. So we're going to start focusing on the Worklight Studio application. So as I mentioned, Worklight Studio is based on Eclipse. The advantage of using Eclipse is, of course, as usual, the fact that you have all kinds of different frameworks and other tools that are also based on Eclipse that are not just from IBM, but open source or other vendors. And if you want to mix and match specific solutions according to your needs, you can very easily integrate those plugins within your unified Eclipse-based IDE. So if, for example, you have a source control management solution that you want to keep using, and you just want to plug Worklight Studio on top of your existing Eclipse that is already using a source control management solution, all you would have to do is install your Worklight Studio plugin onto that existing Eclipse-based IDE. So that's really the advantage. Putting together your development environment or your software development lifecycle environment as you need. With Eclipse and the Worklight Studio, you will also be able to develop, of course, all the web portions of your applications, the JavaScript, the CSS, etc. But as I mentioned before, you can also develop specific features of your application using native code. So this is particularly true for the Android and the BlackBerry, for example, which are both running on the Eclipse-based IDE in order to develop those by installing the Android SDK or the BlackBerry SDK. And in that particular case, you can also, of course, develop the native pages that you might require in your application also on that Eclipse-based IDE directly. Of course, if you develop for the iOS or the Windows Phone, those will not be available on Eclipse. iOS, for example, uses Xcode running on an OS X operating system. And so therefore you will need an OS X operating system and Xcode installed on it in order to develop the native features if you require those, of course, in your application directly. But there's going to be a direct integration between Worklight Studio Eclipse and, of course, for example, Xcode if you're, of course, running on a Mac operating system. In order to make this integration between the two development environments very, very easy and direct. So you do actually not have to create the project from scratch in Xcode. Worklight Studio will create this project for you and maintain it for you. All you will have to do is develop the specific native features of your application, again, if that is something you need to do. I would say that 95% of all cases you will not have to touch anything native in your applications because most business applications can be handled completely and purely using JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. Moving on. Okay, so in the Worklight Studio, we see here a screenshot of that. It's Eclipse-based, as you can see. So the way that Eclipse works is you have perspectives, and each perspective is a collection of views. So here we have one perspective, which is the design perspective, and in this perspective we have our set of views in order to do whatever we need to do in our project. So in this case, this view is specific to do the user interface using the rich page editor portion of my application. So the different views I will have here is more of a user interface palette on the right in order to drag and drop my different features or my different user interface components onto my canvas in order to create those pages. I will see, of course, underneath another view for the properties of that. I have, of course, a view of my HTML source code, etc., etc. So this is how Eclipse works. For everyone who knows Eclipse, this is, of course, a very familiar type of way of working. And here what we see, so it's the rich page editor. So important to note is Worklight comes with one of those rich page editors. So when you have Worklight Studio installed, you can actually design your user interfaces using one of those editors and the palette that goes with it. So in version 5.0 of Worklight, this rich page editor was mainly and purely for Dojo Mobile and Dojo and, of course, HTML user interface development. With the version 5.0.5 that came out in December of Worklight, we added now jQuery Mobile to the palette, and now you can also, of course, if you want to go into the jQuery Mobile kind of framework way, then you can design your user interfaces using jQuery Mobile as well. So this is a very, very powerful and interesting feature in order to create all the user interfaces, because this is something that can consume a lot of time and effort in order to do. So that's a great accelerator. If you would have to implement those interfaces using the native language for each device, this would be, of course, much longer and more complicated. So that's one of those great advantages of using HTML and CSS, is it makes creating user interfaces very, very easy and fast. So on this slide, we talk about the skinning feature of Worklight. So since we are here on a more mobile-oriented environment, we have to tackle specific complex features that come with that. For example, I could be running on a phone, but I could also be running on a tablet. And so in those two cases, I have very, very distinct specifics when it comes to screen resolution, screen density, available real estate of my user interface space, etc., etc. So this means that if I'm developing for the Android phone, for example, I might have to take into account the fact that I don't have a big screen. I cannot display too much information at the same time, and therefore I have to implement different steps, and I have to go from one screen to the other one in order to interact with my application. So if, for example, I'm now on a tablet, the same application might want to make use of that extra real estate space by displaying also the list, but on top of that, maybe the details of that particular step that I might click on my list. So this is a typical list and detail view. So in this particular case, I want to have the tools at my disposal in order to automatically detect the kind of device I'm running on and use or render the interface accordingly. And this is what skins are used for in Worklight. So we can Worklight skins, and those skins can be used to automatically detect and manage different types of device resolution, screen densities accordingly. So it's something that comes with Worklight. So when we look at the studio again, when we develop an application for the Android or the BlackBerry, for example, we have a direct integration in Eclipse. So that makes it kind of easy in order to test my applications directly on an Android emulator or the BlackBerry emulator. All I would have to do is install my Android and BlackBerry SDK into my Eclipse on top of Worklight, of course. And those SDKs will then be used in order to start up or fire up the emulator, could it be BlackBerry or Android in this case, and run my application inside of that emulator so that I get a real test case or real test scenario of my application in a as close as possible environment that I'm trying to target here. So those SDKs are not specific, are not maintained by IBM. So IBM's business is not trying to maintain those SDKs for you. So the SDKs are really managed outside by Google, by BlackBerry, etc., etc. What Worklight does is simply integrate as much as possible those existing SDKs into Worklight itself. And so this integration is actually quite deep in terms of Android and BlackBerry. For example, for Android, if you generate an Android environment for your Worklight application, it will automatically create the pure native Android project for you and populate all its content with your code, with your standard HTML JavaScript code. And you can directly compile it and run it from there without having to write a single line of code using the Android kind of technology. So this is a little different when we talk about iOS. So on iPhone and iPad specifically, we have, as I mentioned before, the specifics of having to run in Xcode. Xcode runs only on OS X, so on a Macintosh operating system. And so in order to simplify things as much as possible, what Worklight does is it will provide you the possibility of running an application in the Worklight Studio itself and export it as an Xcode project for you. So it will actually export and start Xcode if it's available on the machine for you. And all you would have to do is just press the little run button on the top of your Xcode development environment, and it will then compile and run your application using the iPhone or iPad emulator in this case. Again, you do not need to write a single line of code. The extra step involved here is simply to create and generate the Xcode project outside of the Eclipse project and start up Xcode for you so that you can run it from there. Okay, so that was specifically for the client side of your Worklight application. Now let's have a look at the server side, so the Worklight server-side component, where you can actually create Worklight adapters. So a Worklight adapter will not be running on your phone. The Worklight adapter will be running on the Worklight server behind your firewall. A Worklight adapter is developed using JavaScript technology. So that is possible by a specific open source project that exists that will let you run and execute JavaScript on the server side, and to simplify the development task of developers that are already familiar with JavaScript. So basically, you web developers. This has been chosen as the main way of developing your server-side adapters to simplify the integration of your existing developers into your complete project lifecycle. Now, if you do want to implement the server-side logic using pure Java, you can do that as well. So this is not a must. You do not have to stick to JavaScript for the server-side logic. If you want to use Java, you can, of course, also write your server-side adapter logic using Java. So Worklight adapters, the main goal of those are to connect to some kind of backend system. So we have out of the box different types of adapters. So for example, HTTP adapter is an adapter that will let you connect to any HTTP kind of backend system. It could be a SOAP-based web service. It could be a REST-based web service. Then we have an SQL adapter. The SQL adapter will connect you to any database. All you need is JDBC driver that comes with your adapter, and automatically it will be able to interact with the backend database and simplify integration of database-based application for you. Another type of adapter would be the cast iron adapter, IBM cast iron. So cast iron is an IBM lightweight ESB. And if you need to do more specific and complex kind of ESB-style integration with your backend system, cast iron is a good way to do that. So we have an adapter that will directly integrate your application into IBM cast iron if you need to do so. And then the last adapter, which is an adapter that is new since version 5.0.5, is the JMS adapter. So the JMS adapter, like the name says, you can now connect and post messages into a JMS queue or read messages out of a JMS queue. So this also simplifies a lot of integration with more messaging-based backend applications and your mobile application. So once you've developed your server-side adapter, all you would have to do from your mobile client application is use the Worklight APIs, the JavaScript Worklight APIs, in order to dialogue in this very standard way with those Worklight adapters. So the Worklight client API on the device itself does not care about SQL, MQ, cast iron, or web services in the back end. All it knows how to do is communicate with an adapter on the server side, and that's all it needs to do. So that really simplifies the integration with the backend system and the cloud systems that your application might need in the backend. So this is really one of those big values of Worklight that you will not find with the competition that easily, is the easy integration with all kinds of complex backend systems. So this is one. I will mention some other ones a little bit later on. So this is really where the Worklight server has a big value offering to propose. So in the Worklight server, adapters is, of course, one of those things you have, but that's not all. For example, another one would be, as I mentioned before, the unified push mechanisms, push notifications. If you want to do that, the Worklight server can handle that for you in a very standard way. So the problem is, before we had to kind of deal with push mechanisms and push servers through Google, through Apple, or through BlackBerry and Microsoft in a very specific way. So each platform had its own push servers and push mechanisms, and you had to implement this push logic in a native way specifically for each environment. So what Worklight does is it kind of unifies this for you and gives you a JavaScript push notification mechanism API on the server side that you can use in order to make use of this push mechanisms no matter what the platform behind the scene. So this simplifies a lot implementing the push mechanisms for you. So this is another example of what you will have with the Worklight server. Security is also something I mentioned, authentication, security. You have APIs and mechanisms in place with a Worklight server as well for that. Direct update is another one. So in order to push updates of your application in a very easy and direct way, the Worklight server will give you tools to do that. I will come back to that in just a little bit later on. So the main advantage is also that we have our Worklight server running on the server side behind the firewall of your company, so it really protects your data. The Worklight server is the one who will communicate with your backend, and since he's behind the firewall, everything should be protected. And the mobile device only needs to communicate through the firewall using HTTP and HTTPS with that Worklight server. Okay, so now the Worklight console, as I mentioned before, is really some kind of administration-based tool for you. So in the Worklight console, you will see all the applications you have deployed to your Worklight server. So that's what we see here. We have, for example, an application called Dummy App. For this Dummy App, we have two different environments. We have the iPhone-based application and the Android-based application installed. The iPhone actually has two different versions. We see here a version 1.0 and a version 1.1. And what I can do here, for example, is enable or disable specific versions for each particular device. So, for example, if I have a version 1.0 out in the field, people have it installed, and there's a security flaw in that particular application, I fix it, so I create version 1.1 of my application. I can then very easily disable my version 1.0 through the console, and it will automatically disable this application, any device that has 1.0 installed, and push a message, of course, to that person telling him, for example, that a new version exists and please download the new version in order to use this application again. So this is one example of the things you can do through the console and the Worklight server, of course. There's other mechanisms in place, for example, application authentication. If you want to make sure that no one has altered the application on the client telephone itself, on the device itself, you can put in place a mechanism that will make sure that the application running on the device has not been altered. It does that by checking with the checksum on the server side and make sure that nothing has changed there. And if it is the case, then it will forbid you to use it. So this is another way of making sure that no one is altering the application code itself in order to pirate or to use it to its advantage, to do something it's not supposed to do. So those are some of the examples you can do with the Worklight console. As the tab here explains as well, it has a tab for push notification management, and it will also give you information about statistics. You can read out statistics for the console about what kind of devices are using what applications, how many users are connected at what time, etc., etc. So it will give you statistics in a graphical way of the usage of your applications as well. Okay, so I talked about earlier about the four main components in IBM Worklight. There's actually a fifth component, which is the Mobile Application Center. So the Mobile Application Center is like any other application center, like the Apple Store is an application center, the Android Play Market is an application center. So IBM also, with Worklight, will put at your disposal a mobile application center that is your own application center. So once you install Worklight and the mobile application center on your infrastructure, you will be able to install and serve your applications inside of your own organization using your own mobile application center. So this, of course, is purely aimed at the business to enterprise kind of development model, because those mobile application centers are usually running behind the firewall inside of your own intranet. So this is a very useful way in order to go around the normal Apple Store or the Android market in order to distribute you purely business-oriented applications that are for your employees, because using the Apple Store and using the Android market is just overkill for that. I mean, you don't need to go through those external mechanisms in order to distribute your own private applications. So that's really what the Mobile Application Center is there for. It comes with all the main features you will find in application centers. You can rate applications, leave comments on applications, have different versions of applications, etc., etc. So that's really the goal behind this, is to make it easy for you to distribute applications using the Mobile Application Center. So direct updates is one of those other features you will find in the Worklight server, and really the great advantage of direct update is to be able to install your native your hybrid application, which is composed of a native container running web-based technology, onto your device the first time going through some kind of app store. It could be, again, the official app store, or it could be your own app store, as we just seen in the previous slide. So you download your application the first time on your device, and once you've done that and you update your application, you will be able to update the core content of this application, so the HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, directly from your Worklight server without having to go again through the Apple Store or the Android market, etc. So really useful in order to push fixes or push updates of your application directly to the different users without having to ask them to update the complete application using the App Store. So this is a direct updates feature that the Worklight server will offer to you. Very, very useful in order to streamline and simplify the maintenance and the development of your application going through the life cycle of the software development. So on this slide, it just talks about the push mechanisms again. So I mentioned this quite a lot before. This just kind of shows you the architecture of how that works. It could be an Apple, Google, or a RIM for the BlackBerry device, or the Microsoft push server. So those are the different servers that the different vendors will offer or will have at their disposal in order to use this push mechanism. So those servers are not controlled by IBM. Those are really direct Apple and Google servers, etc. And in order to use the push mechanisms, your application has to communicate with those Apple and Google push servers, etc. So to simplify this integration with those vendor-specific servers, Worklight comes with a unified push API. And this unified push API will, of course, shield you from this complexity. So as an application developer, you only have to know how to use the unified push API, and Worklight will take care of the rest for you. Since version 5.05, we now have the new SMS broker-based push mechanism, so you can use, of course, the official Apple and Google service, but now on top of that, if you have a phone that has a 3G connection or just a cellular connection, you can now also use SMS and MMS as a channel in order to send push notifications to your different applications. So that is also one of those great new features that comes with the 5.0.5 version. So in terms of authentication and security, Worklight has a very robust framework for authentication. So the goal is to have to manage different types of framework modules. So one of them is called the authenticator, and the other one is called the login module. So the authenticator is the component you can use in order to implement the way of collecting user information for login procedure. So the most basic way that everyone knows is the username and password. So this is a specific username password type of authenticator, a form-based authenticator. But of course, there's another all list of different types of authenticators out there. It could be cookie-based. It could be your custom authenticator if you have a very complex authentication mechanism in place. The banks usually have those. Or you have multiple types of authentication levels where the user has to go through two different authenticators in order to authenticate. Let's say, for example, a form-based one, and the second one would be answer a secret question. So this is the chained mechanism of the authenticators. So those are different types of scenarios of collecting user information in order to authenticate a user. So the framework comes with authenticator logic and the APIs that will let you implement your own authenticator or use out-of-the-box authenticator. The second type of module you will find is the login module. The login module sits purely on the server side of Worklight, and the login module will be responsible for reading out information for whatever form it comes from the authenticator, and translate that and matches that with some kind of backend database system or whatever you have in the backend in order to authenticate that person. The most common one would be, of course, an LDAP repository, but whatever you want to use in the backend to authenticate someone will be done using the login module APIs. So those are the two main components you will be manipulating in your application to implement all the authentication mechanism, and this makes it very robust and easy to implement. So this is really another one of those great features that the Worklight server will provide. So then there's encrypted cache. So since we're talking about HTML, JavaScript-based applications, you might wonder, okay, so what about the data that my application needs? What about, for example, let's take again the example of the sales force. My salespeople are running around with tablets, have my application installed in it, and of course this application requires all my product information. And I need to be able to interact with those product information on my mobile device, to search for specific products, to maybe add new clients to my application, etc., etc. So this requires for the HTML, JavaScript-based application to also be able or capable to store data and read data locally. And this is done using an HTML5 feature called cache, so local storage, HTML5 local storage. So in order to extend this local storage for more security, Worklight adds an encrypted mechanism on top of that cache. So Worklight will encrypt data that it goes into this local storage for you and read it out and decrypt it for you. So this makes it possible to secure this data on the local device and on the local storage itself. So if someone steals the phone and is not capable of decrypting it, this data will be useless for that person. So now we talked a lot about Worklight. I want to mention quickly one extra tool on top of Worklight, and that is IBM Endpoint Manager. So Endpoint Manager can be used in parallel to Worklight in order to tackle more device-specific security features. So Worklight will handle application-specific and administration and security for you, but when it comes to securing the device itself, then you need an extra tool in order to manage that. So IBM's solution for that is called IBM Endpoint Manager for mobile devices. So Endpoint Manager is a tool that existed for a long time at IBM that was specifically designed to implement security features and control over devices that are desktop-based. And now with the mobile device manager extension of the Endpoint Manager, we can actually implement the same kind of control of devices on mobile devices like Apple phones and Androids and Blackberries, etc. So the kind of things you can do with that are, for example, controlling a data wipe over the internet on a device. So let's say someone steals your device or a salesperson is going to the competition. You want to make sure that this particular application that he's using that comes from you and that stores data, sensitive data that you owe, he might take them with him. So you want to do a distant wipe of this data using Endpoint Manager. So those are the kind of things you can do with Endpoint Manager. You will be able to wipe data over the internet on your various applications that contain the sensitive data. Another example would be to detect if the phone is a jailbreaked phone. You might want to know about that, and you might want to put in place security rules on your employees' phones and devices that make sure that they do not use jailbreaked devices in order to run your applications. Or you can manage a whitelist and a blacklist of different types of applications. So if, for example, the user of the phone has blacklisted applications installed, Endpoint Manager will detect that for you and will, of course, issue a warning to the administrator, send an email to the user of that device, and you can then, by distance, deactivate the usage of those applications or your enterprise applications if that person does not fix or correct the blacklisted applications installed on its device. So that's another example of what you can do with Endpoint Manager. Another one would be, for example, to locate over the internet using the GPS a particular device if someone steals it. An Endpoint Manager for mobile devices installed on the device and someone starts it up, you will be able to find the position of that device using the GPS signal. So those are some of the examples you can do with Endpoint Manager and really secure the device itself and give you full control over the usage of that device and the security of the device itself. So what we see on the screen is just an example of the architecture. You have the Tivoli Endpoint Manager server, and you can have multiple relays of that service or just one server. You can add the iOS extender. iOS is a little specific, so there's a specific iOS extender plugin that you will put on top of Tivoli Endpoint Manager to give you full control of iOS-based devices as well. But this is just to say that you can control any kind of device using Tivoli Endpoint Manager. Okay, so that was it for a brief introduction and presentation of IBM Worklight. On this last slide, I just want to highlight the new features that came with the new version 5.0.5 that came out in December. The most interesting ones here to read out is the new JSON database for local storage, for example. So this will give you, on top of normal local storage that you can use before, you can now use a JSON-based database for that, so a JavaScript object notation-based database. So what this will do is it will let you store under the JSON formats all kinds of data using the JSON format and read out this information, store new data, update this data using APIs, Worklight APIs for this JSON store. So this, of course, does not have the power of a regular SQL-based database. With a normal SQL-based database, you can do fairly complex kind of database features. You can do outer joins, inner joins. You can join multiple tables together, have relationships of private key and public key, etc. So that is something that is, of course, still lacking in the more lightweight JSON-based database. So it is really meant for more simplistic storage and search of data into your phone-based application, but is sufficient for most cases. So again, if a salesperson is out there with a database of products that your insurance has and you need to search through this database using search criteria, JSON is sufficient to do that. So you can do this using JavaScript and JSON in a fairly easy way. What you cannot do is have, again, as I said, like multiple joint tables together and use this kind of relationship of private key and public key and those kind of things. Another feature that is new is stuff on security. So security, we added new features like support for Kerberos, for example, Microsoft Kerberos, or authentication or SML-based authentication. So those are extensions that we integrated into security framework itself. So this is now also possible. So the App Store, the Worklight App Store, is now production ready. For those of you who were familiar with Worklight before, we didn't advertise the App Store because it was still in kind of a beta stage and meant for development purposes only. Now it really is production ready and can be used in a full production environment as well. So as I mentioned, jQuery support in the rich page editor support is also one of those great features. The SMS support for the notification channel is one of those great new features we have. And of course, new target devices like Windows 8 and some extents in Java 2 Micro Edition have been added to the Worklight itself. And in terms of the server side, the new JMS adapter has also been added and is a great enhancement to the Worklight server. Okay, so that concludes the presentation on IBM Worklight. Before I close this webinar, I just quickly want to get your attention on the IBM Developer Works website for this Worklight event. So if you go to the link ibm.co/dw endpoint-worklight track, you can see the link on the bottom of this slide. If you go to this slide, you will be able to access this My Developer Works website. You can just simply register to the website and be part of this community. And from that point of view, you will be able to join discussions about Worklight, ask your questions about Worklight. Also, this presentation will be available in a PDF format on this community website. So if you go to this link, you will be able to find under the Files section that you see in the menu on the left, you will be able to get access to this presentation and download it. Myself, I'm part of this community, so if you have any further questions about IBM Worklight, its features, what you can do, its limitations, etc., you can ask those questions on this page, and I will, through this page, answer to your questions as well, using the message boards. The last slide I want to show you is a link for you to download the latest version of IBM Worklight. So if you go to ibm.co/DW Worklight Edition download track, so DL track, the link is here, just write it down. You will be able to download the developer edition of IBM Worklight, which is a free edition of Worklight, not meant to put your application into production at the end, but it will let you do all the development of your application for free. So it lets you try IBM Worklight, and it lets you go all the way to the end of your development process before going to production for free in a hassle-free way. So just download Worklight, install it, play around with it, go to the IBM Work site, and look for the tutorials. There's a lot of tutorials on the IBM website on Worklight in order to implement security, adapters, and any kind of things that we talked about today, and much more, of course, using those tutorials. It makes it very easy to get your hands on it and to start working with it in a very quick way. Okay, so that is it for me. I'm done with this webinar. I hope I could bring over some valuable information to you and kind of promote the value of IBM Worklight. Thank you all very much for listening and hope to talk to you or hear about you soon. Bye.